Today we're going to be taking the engine and the transmission, the whole powertrain out of this 2004 Lincoln Aviator. So to start with, we're going to start draining all the fluids, starting with the radiator. Then we'll drain the oil, drain the transmission, do all that fun shit. So to drain the radiator, we're going to crawl underneath. On the bottom side of the radiator, we're going to find a petcock. We're going to take that out. Going to be this guy right here. And we'll let that drain, then we'll take the hoses loose. Get all that crap off. Then I'll show you all the bolts you need to take out to get the radiator pulled. And we'll get a little more room once all that's done to get all this stuff out. And we should be able to pull the engine out of the top here. So now that we got all the radiator fluid, coolant rather drained, we are going to have to go in here and get the fan clutch removed. So you are going to need some tools for that, and it's pretty standard fan clutch removal set. If you ain't got one, you can rent it. But we're going to have to pull that stuff off so we can get the shroud off so that we can get the radiator out. So I'm going to set you down and take care of that, and then we'll keep going. So once we go through all this to get the shroud out, you're going to have a bolt here, a bolt here. You're also going to have to remove the overflow tank, the reservoir. It's going to have 2 8 mils right here. Another one when you move the upper radiator hose right there. And then, you can see down there. Oh, probably not. But you got a big old bitch fucking hose down there, so you're going to have to get down and get that fucking clamp. It's going to look similar to these clamps. Fuck those clamps, by the way. To get those off, you just need a set of pliers. You can get in there, work them, break all the skin on your fingers. It's always fun. So let me finish getting that, and then I'll continue this. So fun fact, when you're pulling the radiator shroud out, there's 2 pieces to it. And when you're underneath getting the lower radiator hose, you're going to look for 2 10mm bolts, one here and one right here. It'll let you separate the 2 pieces. The lower piece drops out of the bottom, top piece comes out of the fucking top. Now that we got all that out, see, we got a little more fucking room in here. Now we can start pulling the electric fan as well as the radiator here. And then I'll show you what to start looking at to disconnect everything to start pulling the engine. And when we get to it, one thing to pay attention to is the routing of your wires, your cables, your vacuum hoses, everything. Whether you're just replacing the engine or you're doing as this guy wants, we're going to be doing an engine swap into an F100 body. And he wants all the conveniences of the turnkey. But like I said, we'll talk more about that when we get to it. Alright, now to pull out the electric fan, you got one connector over here on the driver's side. So what you're going to have to do is on the black and yellow side here, there's a little tab you're going to press down. Press that down and just pull the clip out, or pull the plug out. And you're going to have 2 10mm bolts, one on each side. One here, one here. You're going to loosen those, take them out, and your electric fan will come out. Now we're going to get ready to pull the radiator out. You're going to have 4 bolts, one in this corner, one up in this corner, and then each of the corners at the bottom. Take all 4 of those out, you'll be able to wiggle it out of the brackets that it's in. Once we get that out, then we can start pulling the rest of the shit. Alright, now that we got the radiator out, One thing I forgot to mention, the radiator brackets here. There's going to be a 12mm bolt, one on this side and one on this side that bolts it to the core support. And you take those out, it makes it a little easier to kind of separate them, because the top of the radiator case wants to hit against the rubber insulators. So take that out, and you'll be able to wiggle the radiator out. Next, we're going to come in and separate the brackets from the condensers. We're going to take out that bolt and that nut, and that'll let us get the brackets out of the way, and then we can finish taking out the AC lines and the condenser. And then we will start pulling the cooler lines, get all that stuff separated, and then I'll show you what to do with the engine as far as what needs to come off and what doesn't. So the next thing we're going to take out, now that we've got the condenser and the radiator and the brackets out, you're going to have to remove the transmission cooler, which you're going to need these guys for it. Again, if you don't have the nicer sets, you can go out and rent them. But what we're looking at are these lines down here. So what this tool does is it snaps around the line and it pushes inside of this collar and releases it, so you can just pull it off. And that is a necessary step. Do not try to just cut the lines unless you plan on replacing them. Alright, now that we've got the trans cooler out of the way, we've got the condenser out of the way, and the radiator plus the brackets, here's what we're left with. Nice wide open spot, which should give us plenty of room to be able to scoot this motor forward and kind of yank her out of the top here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start by taking off all the stuff that ties the motor to the fucking body. So I'm going to take off the air cleaner, tubing, pretty much all the electrical stuff. So this is where you need to pay attention. Take as many pictures as you need to, because when you put this back together, one piece in the wrong spot, nothing's going to work right. So I will start doing all that, and I hope you continue to stay along for the fucking ride here. So I got the airbox out, which was just taking off the 4 screws you see here in the 4 corners. I wanted to take a second and kind of explain this. So this is your MAF. It's called a mass airflow sensor. And what it does is it measures the amount of air entering the engine. And what the computer does with that information is then it can decide how much fuel to dump in to essentially keep the vehicle running with all your emissions related stuff. And if you look closely at the center of this guy, I know it's not focusing here, right there. So what this is referred to is called a hot wire. And what the computer does is it sends a certain amount of current through that sensor to heat it up, and it keeps it at a constant temperature. And what it does with that information is as the air rushes over it, it gets it cooler and cooler, and the computer has to send more and more voltage or current through it to keep it at that precise temperature. And when it does that, it gets a feedback, and then it can basically translate that into how much air is going through your intake system into your plenum, and then it adjusts accordingly. So there's a lot of technology that goes into you being able to sit down in your vehicle, turn your key, and bitch fires right up. Whereas before, when we still had carbureted engines, like this little motherfucker sitting over here, you had to sit there and pump the gas a couple times, hope your choke still worked, and hope the thing fired up. But with these new modern conveniences, this is kind of what you get. So as we go through this process of removing all this, I'll try to remember to stop and explain some of the things that make these newer engines your turnkey, super convenient, ready to go trucks. So I'm just kind of continuing through disconnecting harnesses, disconnecting lines. As you go through and follow all of them, you'll be able to see which ones you need to connect, or which ones you need to disconnect, and which ones will actually come off with the engine. So as you're kind of going through your AC lines here, these are going to have to be disconnected. On this model, it's going to have to be done down here at the compressor. So here's the line coming in. Now it's kind of hard to see back there, so that line has to be removed. As you're going through and finding these different harness connection points, you're gonna have to trace them around, and like I said, you'll see which ones have to come off and which ones don't. If you follow them and they go anywhere near the body, or into the body, excuse me, you're gonna have to disconnect it. A lot of these are run together, so you don't have to disconnect individual connectors. You know, you trace it back to the main source, and it's either gonna be at the firewall or over at the fuse box. And it'll all come out when you pull the engine. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I'll get back with you. Alright, we got everything disconnected up top. I wanted to show you a couple of things. On each side, you're going to see one of these little covers. You're going to take those out, and then you're going to see your coil packs. So this specific setup, it's actually COP, which is coil on plug, compared to CNP, which is coil near plug. So that means that COP means it sits right on top of the spark plug. It's got this big dick looking thing hanging off the end of it, and these just sit down in there, get snapped on top of the spark plug. But what I wanted to show you was when you're going through and you disconnect all the connectors for your coils, don't be afraid to break out a Sharpie and just label everything, especially if, like I said, if you're doing any kind of swaps where you're going to be taking the harnesses out. It's nice to have everything kind of laid out and labeled, so that way when it goes back together, it takes away half the fucking guesswork. But now that we got all this done, now I'm going to go underneath and we're going to disconnect the exhaust manifolds and the drive line. We're going to see if we can pull the motor and the transmission together. So it's kind of hard to see down there, but there's our exhaust manifolds, and that's where it connects to the exhaust. That flange back there's one on each side, being a V8 obviously. Well, you can't see shit on this side, but I'm gonna crawl under there and do that, and then we're gonna get the motor mounts out, and we're gonna see if we can get this motor and transmission pulled today. So let's get back to it. We're gonna roll under here and I'm gonna show you what we're looking at. So if you kind of see up there, there's the flange. There's two bolts. That needs to come out, and that'll separate the manifolds from the rest of the exhaust. And we roll back. We got a cross member here that holds the transmission mount, which is these two bolts here. So we're going to take these two bolts out, and then we're going to actually drop this cross member to give us clearance. Roll back a little farther. Here's the back of the transfer case. Your rear drive shaft connects here. You're going to need a special set of sockets to pull these off. I think they're the 16 spline, 12 spline. There we go. So we'll get all that stuff disconnected. We'll get the drive line dropped, get the exhaust separated, get this cross member out, and then we will reconvene and see if we can get this shit yanked. Alright, now that we got everything on the bottom side removed, so we got the cross member out, we got the exhaust disconnected, now we're going to come in, we're going to take the plenum, your upper intake, we're going to take that off. That'll give us more clearance room to get the engine out. Hopefully we can get the engine and tranny out at the same time. Alright, now that we got the intake off, we can kind of take a look and see where we can set our chains and start pulling the fucking engine here. So, depending on what you're doing, once you get this off and you get ready to put it into your next project, or vice versa if you're just swapping the motors out, down here in the underneath the intake, you got two knock sensors. Essentially what they do is they pick up vibrations coming from the block, send a signal back to the computer, and if it sees that, it'll actually retard your timing to prevent detonation, because that's what it thinks it's picking up. Anyways, that would be now is a good time to swap those out. They're cheap. Obviously you're already this far into it. And another thing, you can see I didn't do a great job blowing out the sides of the intake. You want to be careful, especially if you're reusing the engine, not to drop anything in there. Compressed air is the best way to kind of get it out of there. And then once you do have the intake off, make sure you just go ahead and plug all these holes up, including your coolant passages, just to prevent anything from falling in. It's pretty much a bad fucking day when that happens, so little tip for you. Alright, we got everything disconnected, we got our leveler set. Now I'm pulling the motor, the transmission, and everything all in one shot. So I've got mine at a pretty extreme angle. You can see how high we're gonna have to still get up here. But as you're going, just keep in mind all these wires and shit. You probably missed something. So just take it slow, go through, walk everything out, make sure everything's loose and out of the way. That way you ain't repairing pigtails when you're done. And here we go. So we're getting her out. I got a couple more pumps on the jack there, but where's my fucking flashlight? Show you what you're gonna kind of be looking at here if you decide to do it this way. So you can see all the way back to the tail shaft there, and then right behind it's going to be the transfer case. So it's going to take a little bit of working around, but that's how you do it. You know, be slow and be methodical about what you're doing. You know, stop if something doesn't feel right, and by the time you're done, you won't have half as much shit to fix as if you just go at it half-cocked and start ripping shit apart.